Hello and welcome to this week's Politics Today, and in this programme we'll be asking, why is our Prime Minister Kier Starmer rewarding Hamas by announcing Britain's support for a Palestinian state, with all the dangerous implications that go with it. And in this programme today I'm joined by Benson, who's a Christian commentator, together with Robert Harris from Voice for Justice UK. Robert, I'll start off with you. So welcome back to Politics Today, and particularly when we look at the political situation regarding our nation, can this government sink morally any lower than they can? And the answer is yes. But before we get on to the hot topic of today's discussion, please just give us an update on the vital work that you and the excellent team that you work for, Voice for Justice UK, are doing to defend our freedoms where it matters most in Parliament.
Well, there are two things I'd like to highlight, among other things. Firstly, many of us will know that there's a bill going through Parliament, the Assisted Dying Bill. I prefer to call it Assisted Suicide Bill. It got through the House of Commons. It's going to return to the House of Lords in the autumn, and we will be urging our many thousands of subscribers to contact members of the House of Lords to inform them about the facts, about how this would operate in this country and what is going on abroad. It's not really what people think. People will be placed at risk regardless of whether they want to commit suicide. And so everyone's at risk, really. The other thing I'd like to highlight is we are still operating our Commission of Inquiry into Discrimination Against Christians. It will formally close in the autumn. So if anyone who's listening wants to, within the UK, contact us with a view to their case being heard by the Commission, where there's an allegation of discrimination on account of your Christian faith, then do contact us. We're hearing people both publicly and anonymously.
Excellent, thank you. And just good to have you back on the programme as well, Robin. Share with us why, as Christians, it's so important that we support, pray for and encourage organisations that Robert represents, such as Voice for Justice UK, who are on the front lines in Parliament, educating and informing our political representatives about the necessity to defend Christian freedoms in this country.
Well, we need people like Robert and his organisation because, A, there are many in the church who see politics, pardon the expression, as a dirty game. They don't think they should have anything to do with it. And so we need organisations like Robert's to remind us that actually that we have a responsibility as citizens of this nation to challenge things that are wrong, that our parliamentarians, House of Lords are putting forward. And so it's down to folk like Robert and those who work with him, bless their hearts, to stick their head above the parapet and challenge authority. And we need them because they can bring to bear a certain amount of pressure that we can't, okay? I can write to my local MP. He never responds. It doesn't matter what I write to him about, okay? Whereas if I'm supporting an organisation like Voice for Justice, then I'm supporting an organisation that there are parliamentarians who will take notice of what Robert and his group are doing. So that's why it's important. I would like to ask Robert a question, if it's okay.
Of course, yeah, go for it.
Because just the first thing that you mentioned, this assisted suicide bill, I get the impression that there's a lot of confusion, particularly amongst Christians, from some of the things I'm reading in various groups, who think that the House of Lords can actually stop this dead. Can you maybe just quickly tease that out so that people actually understand what the Lords can do or not do in this case?
It's a bit complex. The short answer is it can stop it, but if they introduce amendments to the proposed legislation, then that is not really a possibility. So they can delay it through the Parliament Act of 1949 by, I think it's 1 year. But if they introduce amendments, then it's very unlikely, if not impossible, to actually block. So it's not a done deal yet.
Right, okay.
That's the key message. It's not a done deal.
Fine, okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. On to the topic of discussion, which is really the announcement last week by our Prime Minister Kier Starmer, recognising a Palestinian state. Share with us your thoughts on the timings of this announcement, but also its political and spiritual implications to effectively reward Hamas for the horrors that they committed on October the 7th, the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, mass genocide, and this is how the UK government is rewarding Hamas and the Palestinian Authority by supporting a unilateral Palestinian state.
Well, where does one begin? Kier Starmer's announcement, I interpret it as a form of blackmail. He is saying to Israel, you need to have a ceasefire by September, and if you don't, then the UK will announce at the United Nations General Assembly that this country recognises Palestine as a state, as a potential state. Of course, it has to be voted for by the General Assembly, and it has to be recommended by the Security Council. That's not going to happen because America, because of the Trump administration, will veto that. So it's not going to happen. But symbolically, it's of huge significance. The reason it's blackmail is because Israel is fighting an existential war. It's nothing other than an existential war. If people don't recognise that fact, then everything else, all the thinking that flows from this, is all misinterpreted. It's all distorted. It's an existential war, and if they give up now, if they surrender and say, you know what, we're going to stop this, we're going to keep Hamas in place, they face the likelihood of another October the 7th, and there's this ongoing threat to their national security, to their very existence. So why would Israel submit to this suicidal agenda that is being proposed by Kier Starmer? The other thing as well, the UN, who can't actually create a new state, it can only recognise membership status of the United Nations, it actually says that, this is the UN, that a state that is being considered for membership of the United Nations must be a peace-loving state. Does anyone seriously believe, whatever side you are on the political spectrum, do you believe that Hamas, as the governing authority of Gaza, is a peace-loving state? And for that matter, the Palestinian Authority under President Abbas, does anyone seriously believe that that is also a peace-loving state, where they are paying people who attempt to or actually kill Israelis? They give them monthly payments as a reward. Is that a peace-loving state? I think not. Look, Britain, thankfully, is not surrounded by enemies who want to destroy it. We're not in that situation, thank God. But if we were, would we collectively as a country think about this very differently and empathise with what Israel is currently facing? I think the answer is probably yes. But most of us are in the luxury of our soft armchairs, and we can come out with these ridiculous ideas that Palestine needs to be formed as a state. It's not realistic, it's naive, it's unwise. You can't live next to a state that wants you annihilated.
Very true, very well said, thank you. So let's have a look now at our Prime Minister, Kier Starmer, announcing his support for the declaration of a unilateral Palestinian state.
7th of October 2023, Hamas perpetrated the worst massacre in Israel's history. Every day since then, the horror has continued. The hostages are still being held today. The Palestinian people have endured terrible suffering. Now, in Gaza, because of a catastrophic failure of aid, we see starving babies, children too weak to stand, images that will stay with us for a lifetime. The suffering must end. Yesterday I discussed this with President Trump, and we're mounting a major effort to get humanitarian supplies back in by air, and UK aid has been airdropped into Gaza today, and crucially, by land. We need to see at least 500 trucks entering Gaza every day. But ultimately, the only way to bring this humanitarian crisis to an end is through a long-term settlement. So we are supporting the US, Egyptian and Qatari efforts to secure a vital ceasefire. That ceasefire must be sustainable, and it must lead to a wider peace plan, which we're developing with our international partners. This plan will deliver security and proper governance in Gaza and pave the way for negotiations on a two-state solution. Our goal remains a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. But right now, that goal is under pressure like never before. I've always said that we will recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact for the two-state solution. With that solution now under threat, this is the moment to act. So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution. And this includes allowing the UN to restart the supply of aid and making clear that there will be no annexations in the West Bank. Meanwhile, our message to the terrorists of Hamas is unchanged and unequivocal. They must immediately release all of the hostages, sign up to a ceasefire, disarm, and accept that they will play no part in the government of Gaza. And we'll make an assessment in September on how far the parties have met these steps, but no one should have a veto over our decision. So this is the way forward. We will keep working with all our international partners to end the suffering, get aid flooding into Gaza, and deliver a more stable future for the Middle East. Because I know that is what the British people desperately want to see.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your lack of moral clarity and also endangering our nation spiritually and politically by aligning yourselves with the forces of darkness, which are Islamo-Nazi fascists. And that's the direction you're going in. I'm appalled after watching that, Robin, but share with us this absolute sheer obsession with the Palestinian cause that this current Labour government has, including David Lammy, the official UK spokesman on behalf of Hamas, and his ally Kier Starmer, in singling out the only democracy in the Middle East, the only freedom-loving country in the Middle East, our great ally who we need in order to confront the kind of Islamist terrorist threats that we face in this country, just literally put Israel under a bus.
I mean, Simon, I wish we had a couple of hours just to literally take that speech apart, literally, phrase by phrase, and refute almost every remark that the Prime Minister made, but we don't. Yes, it seems that many Western nations have become obsessed. Since October the 7th, we have all of these demonstrations on a regular basis. Okay, that's putting pressure on our MPs. We have a media network, and we don't even need to bother naming the names, the letters that make them up, who are day by day churning out lies that they don't check, videos that they don't check. So we have a population and we have a government who are being inundated with untruths 24/7. We also have a Prime Minister who is under threat from within his own party. And there are those who would say that he's actually deflecting away from some of his own problems and trying to appease those within Parliament who've been clamouring for this sort of statement for months, if not the last couple of years, since that this whole conflict in the Middle East has blown up. And then, as you've already rightly pointed out, we also have an Islamist influence within our society, within many of our cities, within our local councils, but right up into Parliament, that are also quietly but determinedly putting pressure on the government to again take sides with Israel's enemies. And it makes no sense at all. And we were talking about this on the way into the studio. When you have Hamas congratulating Canada, France, the UK, and other westernized nations for making these sort of declarations, you have to ask the question, really? Are no politicians listening to who's recommending this to the rest of the world? One of the #1 terrorist organizations in the world, at least in the Middle East, says this is a great idea, and nobody thinks, well, maybe we made the wrong statement. It is just It's irrational. It is total insanity. And maybe we'll get round to looking at some other aspects of what's behind all of this.
Absolutely. And Robert, I'm a good fan of Jake Wallace-Simons, who writes for the Daily Telegraph. His op-eds are excellent. His quote is, "Does our government not understand or chooses to ignore the fact that Israel is not trying to kill, starve, or oppress civilians? It's just simply trying to defeat the enemy that attacks its people." And that's exactly what Israel's engaged in. I mean, this whole understanding is, if our nation was attacked in the equivalent way that Israel was attacked on October the 7th, the rapings, the mass murder, the taking of hostages, which posed an existential threat to Israel, if the same thing happened here, we'd want our own government to respond and to take out the terrorist organisation. But somehow, because it's Israel and because we're dealing with Jewish people, then Jewish people don't matter. The nation of Israel doesn't matter. They don't understand Israel's perspective that for Israel to survive in the Middle East and for the forces of good to survive in the Middle East, then terror organisations like Hamas have to be defeated.
It seems to me the Hamas terrorists have launched a very successful PR campaign, global campaign, which so many people are falling for. It's the deceitful idea, the dishonest idea that Israel intends to starve the people of Gaza. They are releasing aid into Gaza, but Hamas wants that aid not to reach the people. They want as many people to either die or to appear to be starved, so that the Western media can promote this idea that Israel is the bad guy and Hamas and its people are the victims. I actually liken these allegations and the allied false allegation of genocide that Israel is committing, I see it as a kind of modern blood libel.
Yep.
The blood libel goes back to at least the 13th century, and it started actually in the UK. Well, there was no UK at the time, it was in England, in Norwich. It's the idea that, the Jews were sacrificing young, Christian children for their blood in order to make the Passover bread. And that was a belief that circulated throughout Europe over the centuries, and there was never any evidence to actually validate or support the crazy allegation. So I think this idea that Israel is committing genocide and intentionally wants to starve the people of Gaza, I see this as a modern conspiracy theory that's often fed into other conspiracy theories about the Jews, trying to globally control the world with its agenda. But I think it's a modern form of blood libel. And interestingly and very shockingly, when I speak to people who have been educated at university, they seem to be intelligent, they're able to engage in critical, objective analysis, and when this subject comes up, they lap up everything the media says. There's no capacity to question or criticise or to just ask, well, maybe there's another way of looking at it, and it's very worrying. I've come face to face with people, and I'm shocked at such degree-educated people saying that Israel is doing this, doing that, and then I ask them questions, have you considered this? And they just dismiss me. They won't even listen. And of course, the media is pumping out this industry of deceit, this industry of lies, and people are not asking, well, maybe there's other ways of looking at it. Can we just look at the broader picture here? So yeah, this is a modern blood libel. That's the key message I'm getting from this.
And Robin, have you ever known a time when we have been under so much deception, where our government is officially lying to us, where our mainstream media are lying to us, particularly kind of ramping up hatred towards Israel, accusing Israel of deliberately shooting Gazans when they're queuing up for food and children, deliberately saying that Israel's carrying out a policy of starvation by limiting aid, when we know this is all fabricated. We know the reason there probably is food shortages, but we know that Gaza is not on the verge of starvation. And if you're going to blame anyone, let's blame Hamas in coordination with the United Nations, who are not delivering a week's worth of food that's lying in a storehouse just inside the Gaza Strip by the Israelis, and the UN refused to deliver them.
Yeah, I mean, there's video evidence, there's photographic evidence out there for 95,000 tons worth of humanitarian aid that is sitting, rotting, because the UN will not assist the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, the GHF, which the Americans and the Israelis set up as a way of distributing the aid directly to the Gazan people, bypassing Hamas, who are still stealing it and still selling it. There's video footage out there that they take themselves and then post on social media. And this is part of the problem too that you've highlighted, in your discussions, that so many of the younger generation don't even watch BBC or ITV or CNN or whoever. They're getting their news from social media. And it's bombarding them 24/7 with these images, with this narrative, all the different things that you've highlighted in that last response. And people are being deceived. And this is our major problem.
We've been deceived in our newspapers. So
I know, but
Daily
Simon,
Express and
okay.
also our...
Where is that, as believers in Yeshua, as believers in Jesus, as believers in the God of Israel, as believers who take the Word of God seriously, we have to recognize that as well as the physical, internet-based manifestations of this deception, there is a higher authority or a higher power behind what is going on in this world today, who is the prince of the power of the air, who is feeding this whole deceptive cloud that is covering most of the westernized world today. I don't think we can underestimate the reality of that, because what people are believing, what you've highlighted, is irrational. It does not make sense, because there's plenty of both written and video and audio evidence that contradicts this narrative that is poured out 24/7. It's there, but people refuse to believe it, or they refuse to even bother to investigate it. And you have to then ask the question, why? What has taken hold of our society that people prefer to believe a lie rather than accept the truth? We were talking in the car, and we've talked about it before. The New York Times yesterday retracted or corrected the story that it blasted out about this one child. We've seen the pictures of him. You can see his backbone as he's in his mother's arms. And Israel actually helped that mother and child leave Gaza in order for treatment for the genetic disorder that child has, even though it's been portrayed as a starvation victim. The New York Times yesterday retracted that, corrected it. What happens? The pro-Palestinian demonstrators arrive outside and throw red paint all over its frontage because it told the truth. Now that says something to us. People don't want the truth. They want to accept the narrative and push it and go with it. And there is a level of deception that we have never seen in our society. The most comparable thing to it is pre-World War II, Nazi Germany.
I was just going to say that it's very, very comparable, and I think that's the lesson we need to draw from ourselves, that if our society and our nation is being so deceived by our politicians and our mainstream media, then of course we're heading in that dangerous 1930s scenario where our freedoms are going to be curtailed. But we only got a few minutes left, so I really want to know your thoughts on particularly calling out our Prime Minister Kier Starmer together with our Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who appear to be acting in the strategic and military interests of Hamas by wanting the UN to be the one that will distribute aid, and also the announcement of, for example, £60 million worth of our taxpayers' money going to UNRWA, when according to Jake Wallace-Simons in The Telegraph says, according to Israeli intelligence, 10% of UN employees in Gaza, about 1,200 men, card-carrying members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad and terrorists, have made good use of UN facilities. About 12 members of the UN staff were allegedly involved in October the 7th atrocities. They were employed by UNRWA, and the British government has pledged 60 million of our taxpayers to fund this terrorist organisation. But also with that as well is that he also quotes the fact that 1,200 people employed by UNRWA deliberately carried out attacks as well on Israel on October the 7th.
When the UN started in the aftermath of the war, it had desirable and honourable aims. Unfortunately, for certain issues like Israel, it's become deeply corrupted And, you know, there are multiple, I haven't got the figures in front of me, multiple resolutions every year that condemn Israel for all sorts of things. This is even before October the 7th. Whereas other countries that have well-known human rights abuse records, like North Korea and others, barely ever get mentioned. Anyone with some decency can see there's something wrong there. There's a lack of impartiality. There's an ideological bias that is inherently anti-Israel. So, yeah, I don't blame Israel for not wanting the UN body to be part of this. Why would you want a party to enter into your country who is doing work with the devil, effectively?
Exactly. We're down to the last couple of minutes of the programme, but Robin, spell out the spiritual dangers for our nation, because there are a few scriptures in the Old Testament that really warn our nation of the dangerous path it's heading in, particularly under this government. The first one, of course, is Genesis chapter 12, 1-3. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, meaning our nation's under a curse. The other one is Joel chapter 3, verse 2, that God will bring the nations into the valley of Jehoshaphat for judgment because they've divided my land and scattered my people. Yeah. This is what happens when you create or push for a Palestinian state.
Yeah. I mean, again, coming back to the fact that we're Bible-believing followers of Yeshua, of Jesus, we have to take the Word of God seriously. And if we don't, then we, as the believing community within this nation, are going to waken up one day to quite a shock, because God will not be mocked, okay? Kier Starmer, David Lammy have poked God in the eye. No question in the statements they've made in the last few days. And God will not sit by and let that pass. And our leaders, who God holds responsible for the whole nation, are bringing his judgment upon us. And that doesn't mean that God is, going to inflict plagues or whatever upon us. God can withdraw his protection from us. And I think that's what we've seen over the last couple of decades. Slowly but surely, God is pulling back, and the mess that we're in as a society is actually God's judgment ongoing. This is going to precipitate it even further.
Robert and Robin, brilliant job you've both done today on Politics Day. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. I find it personally distressing and upsetting that our Prime Minister, Kier Starmer, has called for a unilateral Palestinian state with no understanding of the spiritual dangers and the political dangers that this will entail for our nation. As a people of God, we need to pray and intercede that God would stop this announcement of a unilateral Palestinian state. Otherwise, our nation is under a curse from God. So thank you for watching Politics Today.